Good afternoon, everybody. This is your debate tutorial for your economics debate, second semester, spring 2021. I first want to break down that there are three different speakers on each side, the pro and the con side. So whether or not you're debating the minimum wage, whether or not you're debating Biden's economic plans or free trade, all of you will ultimately have a speaker one, speaker two, and speaker three. The job of the first debater is to frame the debate. The job of the second debater is to establish the case. And the job of the third debater is to rebut the opposition's arguments. I'm going to be going over each of these with this video. First, let's be clear that the job of the first video there, the first speaker there, is to define terms. Now, just because I'm saying that's one of the things required of the first thing doesn't necessarily mean that that's the very first thing you need to do. You need to make that determination based upon your specific presentation. But there are a number of terms that should be covered in a variety of different presentations, but which terms you need to cover very much depends upon what side you're on or what prompt you have. For instance, if I'm the con speaker of speaker one in the minimum wage debate, I'm going to make sure that I define price floors and make sure that the rest of the class is clear on what that means. Okay. Sometimes, though, other terms in the prompt need to make sense to the rest of the audience. Clarifying what fair trade means or what Proposition 13 means also needs defining. So make sure that you include that somewhere in your introduction. Your second job, though, is to frame the debate. And what I mean by that is we need to make sure that we understand what it is that you're arguing. For instance, if one of the key things that I'm focusing on the pro side of the debate is equity. That's a key value that my side will be focusing on. So I'll be looking at things like narrowing the racial wage gap. I'll be focusing on things like lifting people out of poverty. And the examples that I use, the historic examples that I use, will primarily focus on those elements. So when I'm looking at the decision makers and those impacted, I'm using examples that forward that particular point. And the claim that I establish should be established relatively early in the debate. So when I'm establishing those historic examples, the rest of the audience can follow and understand which core elements that I'm speaking to. For instance, if I'm talking about how the minimum wage has been used successfully to lift people out of poverty, well, then I'm going to use the historic examples that justify that core point. When I'm explaining how it's narrowing the racial gap, I'm showing about how that's occurred in our nation's history here. But recognize that anytime you make a claim, you need to associate it with both evidence and reasoning. So you've got your central claim that the minimum wage should be increased because of A, B, and C. But that A point, that B point, that C point constitute what are called subclaims or subtopics within your argument, and those too require evidence and reasoning for each, and you can see what each of those should do. Now, let's be clear on Speaker 2's role now. Speaker 2's job is to ultimately create a bridge between Speaker 1's first presentation. That's their primary aim, because remember, you're arguing the same claim here essentially. Doesn't have to be necessarily word for word here. However, the criteria should be ultimately the same, so that way the class can ultimately see what it is that you're arguing, and the opposition can tell what you're arguing. If you end up with a separate criteria than Speaker 1, you're essentially creating a moving target for the opposition, and that's not fair. Let me clarify what I mean by creating a bridge with Speaker 1. Remember, Speaker 1 spent a lot of time looking at evidence, historic evidence, looking at things like how unemployment went down the same time where minimum wages weren't increased, right? But when the minimum wage was hiked, okay, we see some of where that's happening in the past, so where those trends are occurring. But by the time that I am Speaker 2, I can look at newer data here, and I can look at, hey, look, in 2013, if we would raise the minimum wage from $7.25 to $9, we increase unemployment by 0.7%. If we do so in 2015, we increase unemployment from 5.3% to 7.5%. I'm registering that that price floor argument created by Pro 1 and using historic examples from 1933 to 1945 can be shown in 2013, 2014, and 2015 as well. I'm creating that change over time. And that's primarily what you'll be seeing in this specific slide as well. You're trying to demonstrate a longer case, and what you're doing within that is you're creating a consistent, cohesive argument so the class can see precisely where you're going. And that is the primary goal there. All three of you, though, that's speakers 1 through 3, need to establish reasoning. Let me give you an example about what that might look like. So here's what it might say. I'm con 2 on the minimum wage debate. What this trend of increased unemployment proves is what my partner, speaker 1, demonstrated about the price floor, leading to more unemployment. Here, the increase in unemployment in a much smaller minimum wage increase leads to unemployment levels increasing from 0.7 to 2.2%. Which is in the millions. Hence, whether it's 1937 or 2015, wage hikes lead to mass joblessness, period. So, and that's what reasoning looks like. But there's another component of debate that you don't always have to do within a paper, although I would argue in a paper it's extremely important as well. But after you've established your claim, your evidence, and reasoning, you need to establish what's called impact. And here's what that could look like. Again, let's say I'm con 2 on the minimum wage debate. Pro 2 spent a great deal of time talking about how much this will help the urban poor, but most of the country doesn't live in San Francisco, New York, or Seattle. Thus, our sides focus on the impacts of unemployment in less populated areas, and the need for more regional answers to issues like the minimum wage should be considered more than the pro side's one-size-fits-all approach. This gets at impact, why we should care, and why our focus needs to be here rather than what the other side is arguing. Again, that relates to the framing of the debate, right? Okay, now let's take a look at the importance of flowing the debate. All three of you should basically set up, there's a lot fancier ways to flow a debate, but I would strongly recommend you just do a simple line straight down the middle of your paper and you jot down specifically what the other side is saying. So then you can see what your side is saying relative to them. I don't think I mentioned flowing both sides today in the class. So if all you get down is what the other side is saying, for now, that will be simple enough, but do jot that down. So for instance, if I am, and you can see that here on the bullet below, if I am on the pro side, let's say I'm pro 1 or I'm even pro 2, and I just heard con 2 focusing quite a bit on rural unemployment. I'm going to get that down on my page, and I'm also going to put down the source. Maybe they're relying on the Hill. I'm going to put down both because that's going to be very important for speaker 3 later. If I just sit there during the debate, you are leaving your speaker 3 high and dry, and that is not at all fair to them. And remember, it is a group grade. It isn't just your specific presentation. All three of you play a part in this debate. So make sure that you're working together as a team by flowing the debate and getting down what they're saying, because that way, when I put you in your breakout room after round 2 is over and you get a chance to speak with the other 2 speakers, you can tell them, hey, make sure you hit this point on blah, blah, blah. And you should have the article related to this. This is how it connects. Automatically, you're playing as part of a team and you're not leaving them kind of on their own that way. Now I want to speak to speaker 3. Okay, so again, speaker 1 has spoken from 5 to 7 minutes. Speaker 2 has spoken 5 to 7 minutes on the areas that I just addressed. Now we're on to speaker 3, who also speaks for 5 to 7 minutes. I want you to remember that bullet that was on that last slide. I didn't read it, but now I am ultimately going to read it. It says, any points from the opposition that go unaddressed are awarded to the opposition. This is why the flow becomes so essential. So your outline and annotated bibliography should allow you to anticipate most of their major arguments. The whole point of you establishing your outline is to establish this is where we think they're going to go first. This is where we think they're going to go second. Even if it's not first, second, or third, these are the main points that we think they're going to address. And here is the evidence that we're using to disprove that. This is where your annotated bibliography and outline becomes so important on that, okay? Your evidence, the strength of your evidence, the strength of your sources can help better prove that point. But that is the point of a good rebuttal. Now, when you're rebutting, you can do that any number of different ways. You can attack their source, okay? If you do your annotated bibliography thoroughly, as hopefully the rest of your team will do, you might find that the other side will likely rely on a source that, according to Media Bias Fact Check, might have inconsistent factual reporting, or might be very lean very hard left or very hard right. If you're finding examples of that, that is an area where you can attack them. You can attack them on their logic. We talked about not confusing causation with correlation. We talked about the danger of overgeneralizing, speaking about rural areas as if they're a monolith, that all rural areas are the same, or even that any area outside of California or New York is somehow rural. That too might be seriously misguided. You can attack them on any points they fail to address. We mentioned that a moment ago. If they fail to speak to your point about rural unemployment, attack them on that. Okay, you can attack them on their lack of sourcing if they fail to state their sources. I would argue any points that the other side doesn't state evidence for, those should be thrown out, and you should state that explicitly. The other side made claims regarding blah, 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 and they presented evidence related to this, but they failed to source it. Therefore, we believe that the pros arguments related to narrowing the racial gap and the data related to that should be thrown out because they presented no sources whatsoever. Recognize that these are among several different ways you can rebut an argument. There are many other ways as well. What isn't available to you, though, are any ad hominem attacks. And an ad hominem attack means that you are attacking the arguer rather than the argument. And I want to make sure that you're clear on the distinction between those two. Okay, now, it's likely that as speaker 3, you're like, oh my God, I don't know how to address one of those points. You're hearing it come up and you didn't find a source related to that. If the other side really did their best to research well, that very likely could happen. Here, though, is where I want you to think the way a politician does when they get asked a question that they're not quite sure how to answer. What they typically do is they take that question or a rival argument, a rival candidate's argument, and they take it to where they want it to be. And they say, look, the opposition over here is focused on boom, but this over here is a much bigger issue because of A, B, and C. Or just as they did in the video, the instructional video that I showed you a moment ago, you can be like, hey, this is where you might have a point here. This argument about rural unemployment is an interesting point, but most of the country lives in urban areas, so I'm really not sure why that's a relevant point here. So you can concede point on one area, but use the rest against them. A big tip here, confidence is key. So even when you do kind of hear that, an argument that you're like, oh God, we don't have research for that, just pause for a moment. Because I can almost guarantee you that if you did your research on this, you researched multiple sources, you did what you needed to do on your annotated bibliography, okay, you're going to be able to address nearly every argument that they come at you with, even though it might not be word for word what some of the other areas are. Think about those connections. And I think you'll find where it is. Okay. Recognize that those same skills there can be used when you are facing the Q&A period from the class. Now you might be concerned like, oh my God, what if they ask me a question that I have no idea how to answer? Some questions I think are out of line. Like some questions from students get so minute that almost a college graduate with a doctorate in the subject wouldn't be able to answer that. I do stop the questions there. But much like you, the same strategies that you used when addressing the rebuttal and some arguments that you aren't terribly familiar with are what you can use in addressing questions from the class as well. So make sure that you're recognizing some of those pointers. Like one of those pointers that I brought up to you a moment ago was, you might have a point there, or that's an interesting point. We didn't quite find data or research related to that, but we feel that the bigger issue is, and that's ultimately a final point that I want to bring up regarding the Q&A from the class. Finally, and this is big here, confidence is huge. Fake it till you make it on projects like these. Like that is one of the biggest bits of advice that I can tell you. Just remember that make it type part. See me with any questions, and good luck, everybody.